It should have been a joyful moment. My brother Richard's wedding. The whole family was gathered at the Grand Oak Pavilion in Chicago, all dressed up, celebrating what was supposed to be a moment of unity. I arrived quietly, wearing my military dress uniform, a modest smile on my face. I didn't expect praise, but I certainly didn't anticipate what was coming. The day began with a deep blue sky, typical of an October in the Midwest. As I drove my silver Honda Civic down Lincoln Avenue, I thought about what it would be like to see the whole family after almost 2 years away. My last contact with them had been at my mother Helen's birthday when I managed to get just 2 days of leave. Richard, my older brother, was engaged to Lucy, the daughter of a local entrepreneur who owned a chain of pharmacies. A good catch, as my father Joe would say. Upon arriving at the venue, I was greeted with quick hugs and polite smiles. "Look who decided to show up, the little soldier," joked my Uncle Rob, patting me on the back. I smiled, already used to that kind of comment. To them, I was just the youngest son who had chosen to play soldier instead of following the family's business path. The ceremony went as expected. Emotional vows, my mother's tears, the song "At Last" playing as Lucy walked down the aisle in her white gown. I sat in the third row, watching everything with a mix of joy for my brother and an emptiness I couldn't explain. It was as if I were watching my family's life from a distance, like a spectator. It happened during the reception. Between glasses of California sparkling wine and salmon canapes, my new brother-in-law, Paul, Lucy's brother, gave a toast. He started by praising Richard, a successful entrepreneur with a brilliant future, and then, mentioning the groom's family, he pointed at me. "And there's Drew, the Sullivan family's insignificant little soldier." Laughter erupted through the hall. While Richard was building an empire, Drew decided to march for his country. But who needs a general in the family when we have a CEO, right? More laughter. My brother Richard raised his glass and laughed too, a little embarrassed, but without defending me. I forced a smile, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like a stranger in my own family, but that moment was particularly painful. I tried to ignore it, continuing to eat the filet mignon with a wine reduction sauce on my plate, trying to appear indifferent. I greeted some distant relatives, cousins I barely recognized, aunts who asked when I was going to get a real job. I answered politely, without going into detail about my military career. The band started playing "Don't Stop Believin'," and the couples filled the dance floor. I remained seated, watching. I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was my father, with that characteristic smell of Old Spice aftershave and whiskey. "So, Drew, when is a soldier like you going to throw a party like this, huh?" He laughed, adjusting his gray suit jacket. "Richard is already on his third condo and you're still living in military barracks. How long are you going to stick with this dead-end life?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the glass of water in my hand, thinking of all the things I could say. About the missions I led, about the lives I saved, about the decisions I made under fire, about the rank I achieved before I was 40, a rarity in the U.S. Army. "One day you'll understand, Dad," was all I could manage. He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Understand what?" "That my son threw away a promising future to play soldier. Richard is right. You should rethink your choices." And then he walked away, joining a group of business friends discussing the government's new economic plan. I stood there, alone, feeling a tightness in my chest. Not of anger, but of a strange sadness I couldn't explain. I had risked my life for my country, participated in UN peacekeeping missions, led operations that saved hundreds of civilians. But that night, in their eyes, I was just less important, less successful, less worthy of respect. I finished my dinner in silence, watching the party happen around me. My mother passed by, hurrying to ensure everything was perfect. She stopped briefly, straightened my tie, and whispered, "Try to understand your father, son. He's just worried about your future." I nodded, with no strength to explain that my Future was being built, just in a way they couldn't or wouldn't see. At midnight, when the newlyweds cut the 5-tier cake with fondant icing, I decided it was time to leave. I said my goodbyes discreetly, hugging my brother and wishing the new couple happiness. Richard patted me on the back and said, "Thanks for coming, soldier. Next time, bring a girlfriend, okay?" I stepped out into the cold Chicago night, the city lights reflecting on the pavement, wet from a fine drizzle. Inside the car, I took off my tie and breathed deeply. Tomorrow would be another day. A day when perhaps they would begin to see who I really was. But for that, I would have to show them a reality I had kept hidden until now. Not out of humility, but because I knew they wouldn't care. Not until they had no choice. They never understood what my life was really like. They never knew what it meant to wake up at 04:30, when the sky was still dark and dew covered the training grounds at West Point. They never felt the weight of responsibility for commanding men and women willing to give their lives for their country. They never had to make split-second decisions that would haunt them for years. After Richard's wedding, I spent the night in my old teenage bedroom at my parents' house. The walls still had the posters of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls that I'd put up when I was 15. Lying on the narrow bed, I stared at the peeling ceiling, thinking about the party, the laughter at my expense, the look of disappointment in my father's eyes. I picked up my phone and looked at the messages from Major Evans. We had an important meeting at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., in 2 days. National security matters I couldn't share even with my family. I swiped through my photos and found pictures from the last mission on the border with Afghanistan. Me, next to Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, coordinating the evacuation of a village threatened by insurgents. 23 lives saved, 0 casualties. An operation that received direct praise from the Department of Defense. But none of that mattered to them. To my family, I was just Drew, the younger brother who didn't want to follow in his father's and brother's footsteps in the family business. The boy who wasted his potential by joining the Army. I remembered my graduation from West Point. While my classmates had entire families cheering, taking pictures filled with pride, I just had my mother sitting timidly in the bleachers. My father and Richard were in New York, closing a deal too important to postpone. When I received my officer's sword from the commandant, I searched for Helen's face in the crowd. She was smiling, her eyes teary, but she was alone. I got out of bed and opened my suitcase. At the bottom, under the clothes folded with military precision, was a dark wooden box. Inside were my medals. The Distinguished Service Cross received after a rescue operation in hostile territory, the Humanitarian Service Medal for my work in Haiti after the earthquake, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, awarded by the President himself. I never displayed them at home. I never told the stories behind them. What for? At most, I'd get a polite, "That's nice," and the conversation would quickly turn back to Richard's company acquisitions or my father's new business contacts. In Haiti, during the peacekeeping mission, I commanded a unit that set up a field hospital in Port-au-Prince. We worked for 72 hours straight without sleep to treat hundreds of wounded. When I finally managed to call home, my father answered with, "I can't talk right now, we're in an important meeting." On my next call, 3 weeks later, he didn't ask anything about the mission. I put the medals back in the box and tucked it away in my suitcase. Through the bedroom window, I could see the sky starting to lighten. Friday, 5:20 a.m. Next door, Mr. Henderson was already walking his dachshund in his well-kept garden. Some things never changed in Chicago. I took a quick shower and put on my camouflage uniform. I preferred not to wear my dress uniform to impress. That would raise suspicion. I wanted the revelation to be natural, almost accidental. I went downstairs, trying not to make a sound, but Helen was already in the kitchen making coffee. "Son, you're up already? I thought you were going to rest today." She smiled, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "I have commitments, Mom. Army business." I took a sip of the strong coffee, just how I liked it. "Your father said he's going to take you to see the new factory today." She seemed worried. as if anticipating a conflict. That won't be possible, unfortunately. I have a meeting at the Pentagon at 10 a.m. I grabbed a fresh bagel from the basket. Actually, I was going to invite Dad to come with me. It might be good for him to see a little of my work. Helen raised her eyebrows, surprised. Do you think he'll want to go? I shrugged. It's worth a try. My father appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in his blue dress shirt and gray slacks, the unofficial uniform of the Chicago businessman. He greeted us with a nod and sat down, picking up the Chicago Tribune. Good morning, Dad. I took another sip of coffee. I have a meeting at the Pentagon today. I thought maybe you'd want to come with me, see where I work. He lowered the newspaper, looking at me with curiosity. The Pentagon? And what would I do there? Just visit. You're always taking me to see your factories and offices. I thought you might be interested in seeing the other side. He was silent for a few seconds, considering the offer. Finally, he folded the newspaper and nodded. Why not? I guess it's about time I saw what you actually do in that place. The condescending tone was there, as always, but at least he had accepted. It was a start. We left at 8:30 a.m. in my official car, a black Chevy Suburban with government plates. My father raised his eyebrows at the vehicle, but made no comment. During the drive, he tried to make small talk about business, about how Richard was expanding the company into Mexico, about how I should reconsider my options. You know there's always a place for you at the company, son. You don't have to continue in this lad's career. He looked out the window, avoiding my gaze. I like what I do, Dad. I'm good at it. Marching and saluting. Anyone can do that. He laughed humorlessly. I didn't reply. He would soon see for himself. The flight to Washington, D.C. was quiet. We took a commercial flight, with my father occasionally commenting on clients he met at the airport or business he had in the capital. On the plane, sitting next to me, he finally asked, So what is it you do in the Army exactly? You've never talked much about it. It was true. I never talked because they never asked. I command special operations, sensitive missions usually. That was the only response I got before he opened the in-flight magazine and started flipping through it. In D.C., we went straight to the Pentagon, an imposing building in Arlington, Virginia. I parked next to a matte black Lamborghini Urus that had been delivered that morning. My father raised his eyebrows. Is that yours? He asked, laughing, as if the idea were absurd. I didn't answer. He would soon know the truth, and words would be unnecessary. We entered the building, and that's when my plan began to unfold. It was time to show him a life they had never seen or valued. The next morning dawned with a deep, cloudless blue sky over Washington, the sun already strong, at 7 o'clock. I woke up in the functional apartment I kept in the Capitol, a simple but comfortable 3-bedroom in Arlington. My father had spent the night in the guest room, and from the silence in the hallway, he was still asleep. I got up, did my 50 push-ups like every morning, and took a quick shower. I put on my full dress uniform with all the insignia and medals. Today there would be no discretion. It was time to show the whole truth. As I was making strong coffee in the kitchen, I heard the guest room door open. My father appeared, his gray hair disheveled, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He was wearing the same suit from the day before, now wrinkled. He looked at me at the dress uniform and frowned. What's with the costume? He asked, pouring himself some coffee. Dress uniform, Dad. I have an important meeting today. He grunted in response and sat at the table. He seemed uncomfortable, as if he didn't quite know what to do there. For the first time in a long time, he was in unfamiliar territory, without his usual control. Yesterday was interesting, he finally said, avoiding my gaze. I didn't expect all that formality at the Pentagon. I smiled slightly. The day before had been just an appetizer. He had seen officers greet me with respect, but he still didn't fully grasp my position. That would change today. Today will be even more formal, I replied, checking my watch. We have to leave in 20 minutes. He nodded, finishing his coffee in silence. I noticed his eyes scanning the medals on my chest, trying to decipher their meanings. He didn't ask about them, and I didn't offer any explanations. It wasn't time yet. We left the apartment promptly at 8:15 a.m. The driver was already waiting with the official vehicle, an armored Cadillac sedan with a small American flag on the hood. Corporal Mendoza opened the back door and saluted. "Good morning, General." My father stopped for a moment, looking from the corporal to me, a confused expression on his face. He got into the car without a word, but I noticed his posture had changed. He was stiffer, more attentive. During the drive to a secure meeting facility, he remained silent, looking out the window at the Washington monuments, stretching majestically under the blue DC sky. We entered through a private garage where another soldier greeted us with a flawless salute. "General Sullivan, the secretary, is already in the Situation Room. The other commanders arrived 5 minutes ago." "Thank you, Colonel. This is my father, Joe Sullivan. He'll be accompanying me as a civilian observer today." The colonel hesitated for a second, but nodded. "I'll arrange a visitor's pass, sir." While we waited for the pass, my father finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "General, you're a general?" I nodded. "Brigadier General Drew Sullivan, commander of the Joint Special Operations Task Force." He blinked several times as if trying to process the information. "But you never said anything. Why hide it?" "I didn't hide it, Dad. You never asked." A heavy silence fell between us. The colonel returned with the pass, and we proceeded down the corridors of power. With every step, more high-ranking military officers greeted us with deference. Some civilians, government aides, nodded respectfully as we passed. We arrived at the Situation Room, a large space with an oval table in the center, projection screens on the walls, and the Great Seal of the United States in the background. A dozen people were already seated, secretaries, military commanders, and national security advisors. They all stood up when we entered. "General Sullivan," the Secretary of Defense came to me, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. The situation on the border requires your expertise." "Mr. Secretary?" I replied, shaking his hand. "This is my father, Joe Sullivan. He's accompanying me as a civilian observer today with prior authorization." The secretary smiled politely and greeted my father, who seemed to be in a state of shock. I indicated a chair in the corner of the room for him, while I took my place at the table between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the director of the CIA. The meeting began with a presentation on the growing tension on the Eastern European border. A diplomatic crisis had escalated, and there were rumors of military movements on the other side. The United States needed to take a position, and my special forces would be crucial for any containment or intelligence operation. For 2 hours, we discussed strategies, analyzed intelligence reports, and debated diplomatic and military options. At various times, my opinion was requested directly by the secretary. I presented a contingency plan I had developed weeks earlier, anticipating the deterioration of the situation. "Impressive as always, General Sullivan," commented the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "Your foresight was spot on. If we had implemented your plan sooner, we'd be in a better position now." From time to time, I glanced at my father in the corner of the room. His face had lost that expression of condescending superiority. Now he watched everything with a mixture of confusion and perhaps the beginning of pride. At the end of the meeting, the secretary asked me to stay for a few more minutes. "General, we need you at Ramstein Air Base tomorrow. An Air Force jet will be ready at 0500. "I'll be there, Mr. Secretary." When everyone else had left, I approached my father, who remained seated, looking smaller somehow, as if the weight of realization had shrunken him. "We need to go," I said simply. "I have other meetings." He stood up slowly, still processing what he had witnessed. We left in silence, walking through the corridors of the Pentagon. With every salute I received, I felt my father's gaze on me, reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his youngest son. Back in the car, he finally spoke. "Why did you never tell us?" All these years, we thought you were just an insignificant little soldier, I finished, remembering the words from the wedding. He had the decency to look ashamed. I don't understand why hide something like this. I looked out the window at the DC buildings passing by. I never hid it, Dad. You were never interested enough to ask. The few times I tried to talk about my work, the conversation always turned back to Richard's business or your new contracts. But a general. He repeated the word as if he still couldn't believe it. That's important. Important to whom, Dad? To you. What value does this have compared to the millions Richard makes a month? What is commanding men and women willing to die for their country compared to commanding a company that sells industrial parts? My tone was more bitter than I intended. Years of accumulated frustration were spilling out. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Sorry, it's not a competition. I just wanted you to see that I also made something of my life. Something that has value, even if it can't be measured on a balance sheet. My father was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual authoritarian tone. It sounded older, more tired, but also more genuine. I didn't know, he whispered. I should have. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The damage was done, but maybe now the healing could begin. We arrived back at my DC office. I had a video conference with my advance team in Germany in 15 minutes. I turned to my father before we got out of the car. I have to work now. I'll arrange a flight for you back to Chicago for later today. He nodded, then paused as if he had made a decision. Drew, can I stay? I'd like to see more, to understand better what you do. I studied his face for a moment, looking for signs of the old disdain, the usual condescension. I found none of it. Just a father trying finally to get to know his son. Of course, I replied. You can stay. We walked into the building together, and for the first time, we walked side by side as equals. As we entered my command's headquarters, the atmosphere changed completely. The casual air my father carried vanished like mist in the strong sun. I watched his posture stiffen as we walked through corridors of marble and fine wood. With every step, soldiers and officers snapped to attention, back straight, eyes fixed forward. The respect was palpable in the disciplined silence. General Sullivan, one would greet. Sir, another would say. With each salute, I noticed my father watching with growing unease, as if he were in a foreign country without knowing the local language. We proceeded down the main corridor to the private elevator that led to the senior officer's floor. The Tao, soldier operating the elevator, saluted as soon as he saw me. General, good morning. The Chief of Staff of the Army asked if you could stop by his office before the video conference. Thank you, Silvera. I'll head there shortly. My father remained in absolute silence as we ascended. His gaze wandered around the mirrored interior of the elevator, reflecting our images repeatedly. Me, erect in my dress uniform. He, visibly out of his element. When we reached the 7th floor, my executive assistant, Lieutenant Roberta Mendez, was already waiting for us at the elevator door with a folder of documents. Good morning, General. I've prepared the brief for the video conference with Ramstein and added the intelligence reports that arrived an hour ago. She handed me the folder and then noticed my father. Good morning, sir. Lieutenant Mendez, this is my father, Joe Sullivan. He'll be accompanying me in some meetings today. It's an honor, Mr. Sullivan. She smiled politely. General Colonel, Vance is already in the conference room with the technical team. Let's head there then. Oh, and Lieutenant, could you arrange for some coffee for my father? He's had an educational morning. As Lieutenant Mendez moved to carry out the order, I led my father down the hallway. The walls displayed historical paintings of American military operations and official photos of past presidents. We reached the antechamber of the conference room, where several officers were talking in low voices. As soon as we entered, they all immediately stood up and came to attention. As you were, I said, and they relaxed but maintained a respectful posture. I saw my father taking it all in with growing fascination. His eyes lingered on the impeccable uniforms, the medals and decorations, the serious faces that looked at me with a mixture of respect and perhaps a little awe. This was my world, a world where I wasn't the insignificant younger brother, but a man whose word carried weight, whose decisions impacted lives. "General, we have 2 minutes until the connection with Ramstein," a technician informed me, adjusting equipment at the conference table. "Thank you, Sergeant. Is everything ready for Major Costa's presentation?" "Yes, sir. Slides and maps are loaded into the system." I indicated a chair for my father to sit at the back of the room, while I took my place at the head of the table. I opened the folder Lieutenant Mendez had given me and began to quickly review the documents. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my father watching my every move, every interaction, as if seeing his son for the first time. The door to the room opened and in walked my Chief of Staff, Colonel Edward Vance, a decorated veteran with nearly 30 years of service. Tall, with an impeccable posture and piercing eyes that had seen more conflict than most men. He didn't notice my father at first. He came straight to me, clicked his heels in a perfect salute, and said in a firm, clear voice, "Good morning, General. Marvelous Lamborghini outside, sir." The room fell completely silent. My father froze. He blinked several times, confused, then turned to look at me. I nodded once slowly and watched the understanding dawn on his face. His son, the insignificant little soldier, was not just another military man, not just another name on a uniform. He was a general, a leader of leaders. "Thank you, Colonel Vance," I replied, trying to keep a straight face despite the satisfaction I felt. A small indulgence I recently allowed myself. Colonel Vance then noticed my father. "Sir, I didn't realize we had a civilian guest today." "My father, Joe Sullivan. He's learning about our work." The colonel turned and extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Sullivan. Your son is one of the most respected officers in the entire armed forces." My father stood up, a little shaky, and shook the colonel's hand. The pleasure is mine, Colonel." Lieutenant Mendez entered, with a coffee for my father, who accepted the cup with a mumbled, "Thank you." His face was pale, his posture now completely different. The confident, arrogant businessman had given way to a man trying to process a shocking revelation. "Let's begin the video conference," I announced, and everyone took their seats. The screens on the front wall lit up, showing a similar room at Ramstein Air Base where several officers were waiting. Major Costa began his presentation on the situation at the border. Detailed maps appeared on the screens, showing strategic positions, suspicious movements, and areas of potential conflict. Throughout the presentation, I remained professional and focused, asking incisive questions, requesting clarification on specific points, and giving clear directives on how to proceed. This was my element. The place where I felt fully realized, where my intelligence and leadership were not just recognized, but essential. "Major Costa, I want your team monitoring that entry point 24/7. If there's any change in the pattern of movement, I want to be informed immediately, no matter the hour." "Yes, General." "Colonel Vance, prepare a rapid response team. I want them ready for deployment in 2 hours should it be necessary." "It will be done, sir." Occasionally, I would look at my father. He watched everything with an expression that mixed shock, confusion, and perhaps the first signs of a reluctant pride. He was witnessing his youngest son, the one he always saw as inferior to his businessman brother, commanding a national security operation with the authority of someone born to lead. At the end of the video conference, I gave the final instructions and ended the transmission. The room began to empty, with officers leaving in an orderly fashion, each bidding farewell with a respectful general as they passed. When we were alone, my father remained seated, as if he was having trouble standing. "Up!" I approached him, now without the need to maintain the facade of unshakable authority. "So, about that Lamborghini, you asked if it was mine?" I said, allowing myself a small smile. He looked up, still processing everything he had witnessed. He paused, searching for words. I had no idea. I know, Dad, I know. For the first time in our adult lives, I saw genuine vulnerability in my father's eyes. The man who had always considered himself the strongest, the most successful, the most worthy of respect. Now, he was the one looking at me with a new understanding. As if he finally saw the weight I carried, the responsibility that rested on my shoulders. Come on, I said, checking my watch. We still have one more meeting before lunch. He stood up, adjusted his suit, and followed me out of the room. In the hallway, more salutes, more "Good morning, General," more looks of respect. And beside me, my father walked in silence, his world turning upside down with every step we took. The silence lingered for several seconds before Colonel Vance continued the meeting, transitioning smoothly to updates on ongoing operations and future strategies. I watched my father try to keep up, his face pale, his posture now stooped in a humility I had never witnessed in him. For the next 2 hours, he remained in absolute silence, just observing, watching how my every word was noted by high-ranking officers, watching how my suggestions were immediately transformed into orders, watching how even colonels with decades of service treated me with unquestionable deference. For the first time, he was seeing the world where I mattered. A world that operated under constant pressure, where decisions meant lives and my voice commanded respect. After the strategic meeting, we had a 30-minute break before the next appointment. I took my father to my private office, a spacious room with a view of the Washington Monument. The walls displayed photos from operations I had led, framed decorations, and a large American flag behind a solid mahogany desk. "Sit down, Dad," I offered, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs in front of my desk. "Want some coffee? Water?" He shook his head, still processing everything he had witnessed. He sat down carefully, as if afraid of breaking something valuable. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the photos, the medals, the symbols of authority I had accumulated over the years. "All this time," he finally said, his voice low and insecure. "All this time, you were this." I sat at my desk, watching him calmly. "Yes." "Why did you never tell us? Why did you let us think that you were just an insignificant little soldier?" I completed, unable to suppress a hint of bitterness. "I tried to tell you, Dad, several times. Remember when I came back from Haiti after the earthquake? I tried to talk about the operation I commanded, about the lives we saved. You cut me off to talk about the company's new contract with a multinational." He looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the memory. "Or when I got my first star as a general. I called home that day. Mom answered, congratulated me, and when I asked to speak with you, she said you were in an important meeting and couldn't be disturbed." "I didn't know, that's why," he murmured. "Of course you didn't know. Because you never asked." I took a deep breath, controlling my emotions. Over time, I just gave up trying to show you who I really was. If my own family thought I wasn't important, what difference did it make what the rest of the world thought? A heavy silence fell between us. Outside the window, the DC sky remained impeccably blue, a stark contrast to the tension inside the office. Lieutenant Mendez knocked on the door and entered after I gave my authorization. "General, the Secretary of Defense is on line 3. He said it's urgent." "Thank you, Lieutenant." I waited for her to leave and picked up the phone. "General Sullivan." The conversation was brief and technical. Details about troop movements on the border, authorizations that needed my signature, decisions that couldn't wait. The whole time I maintained the professionalism I had cultivated over years of service. My father watched, still assimilating this new version of the son he thought he knew. "Understood, Mr. Secretary. I'll be on site tomorrow to personally supervise the operation." I hung up and made a few notes on a pad. "You report directly to the Secretary of Defense?" my father asked, surprised. "On matters of special operations, yes. My department handles sensitive situations that require discretion and centralized command." He nodded slowly, still absorbing the magnitude of my position. "And that Lamborghini? Is it really yours?" I allowed myself a small smile. "It is. It was a gift." "A gift? From whom?" "The government of Kuwait." Seeing his confused expression, I explained. 2 years ago, we led an operation to rescue 3 Kuwaiti diplomats kidnapped in Colombia. It was a nearly impossible mission. Mountainous region, cartel control, limited intelligence. But we managed to extract them without casualties. The Emir of Kuwait sent gifts to everyone involved in the operation. As the commander, I received the car. My father blinked several times, trying to reconcile this information with the image he had of me. You saved foreign diplomats? Why did you never tell these stories at home?" "What for, Dad? To be interrupted by stories about Richard's acquisitions? To hear how his business was bringing real value to the family?" I shook my head. "At some point I just accepted that you would never see value in what I did, so I stopped trying." Another silence settled in, heavier than the last. For the first time I saw my father, the man who always had an answer for everything, who dominated every conversation, completely speechless. Lieutenant Mendez knocked again. "General, it's time for the meeting with the U.S. military attaché." "Thank you, Lieutenant. We're on our way." I stood up, straightening my uniform. My father also stood but remained still, as if unsure of what to do or say. "You can stay here if you prefer," I offered. "This meeting is more technical." "No," he answered quickly. "I want to go. I want to see." On the way to the meeting room, we passed through the main corridor of the headquarters. Officers and soldiers continued to salute as we passed. I saw my father observing everything with new eyes, no longer with disdain or condescension, but with a growing understanding of the respect his youngest son commanded. The meeting with the American military attaché was brief but tense. We discussed joint operations in the Amazonian border region, intelligence sharing on international terrorist groups with a presence in South America, and cooperation in advanced training. The American colonel treated me as an equal, something that clearly impressed my father. "General Sullivan, Washington is extremely pleased with the results of Operation Green Eagle," the military attaché said. "The Secretary of Defense asked me to personally convey his compliments for your exceptional command." "Thank the Secretary," I replied. "It was a successful joint effort." After the meeting, we walked back to my office. My father seemed to be in a sort of trance, processing everything he had witnessed throughout the day. "Drew," he finally said when we reached the office, "I didn't know. I really didn't know." "I know, Dad. When he seemed to struggle with the words. "At the wedding, those jokes. If we had known." "If you had known, you would have treated me differently?" I asked, looking at him directly. "Is that what matters? Respect? Only comes with the title, with the fancy car, with power?" He didn't answer immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "It's not that, it's just, we just didn't understand the importance of what you do." "And now you understand?" Nodded slowly. "Now I understand." I looked at the clock. It was almost 1 p.m. "I have a video conference with the High Command in 15 minutes. After that, we can have lunch together if you'd like." "I'd like that," he replied, and for the first time that day, I saw a genuine smile on his face. Not the confident, slightly arrogant smile I knew, but something softer, more vulnerable. I left him in the office and went to the secure communications room. During the video conference, my mind occasionally drifted back to my father, sitting alone in my office, rethinking years of interactions, reconsidering every belittling comment, every joke at my expense, every moment he made me feel less important than my brother. When I returned an hour later, I found him standing in front of the wall where my decorations were framed. He was studying each one attentively, reading the inscriptions, observing the symbols that had held no meaning for him just a few hours before. "Ready for lunch?" I asked. He turned and I noticed his eyes were slightly red. Drew, I should have asked. I should have paid attention, I'm sorry. It was the first time I had ever heard him apologize, to me or to anyone. The weight of respect when it finally arrives can bend even the proudest backs. Let's get lunch, Dad, I replied simply. We have a lot to talk about. We left the headquarters together side by side, and as we walked toward the matte black Lamborghini parked in an exclusive spot, I noticed that my father no longer walked ahead of me as he always used to. Now he walked beside me, in a respectful silence that said more than any words could express. That night we returned to Chicago, on a U.S. Air Force jet. During the flight we talked more than we had in all the previous years combined. My father, for the first time, showed a genuine interest in my career, asking questions about operations I could discuss, about the places where I had served, about the responsibilities of a general. I answered patiently, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy. It was good to finally be seen, but it hurt to think of how much time we had lost. How long does it take to become a general? He asked, looking out the window at the city lights below. On average, over 20 years. I was promoted a bit earlier than usual. Why? Successful operations, leadership in critical situations. I was decorated after coordinating the rescue of hostages at the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela 5 years ago. His face showed surprise. That operation that was all over the news? You commanded that? I nodded. Our ambassador and 7 other staff members were held hostage for 9 days. The situation seemed impossible. I remember watching it on TV. It was all anyone talked about that week. Yeah. Richard called home around that time, didn't he? To talk about expanding the company to Chile. I saw the embarrassment on his face. Yes, he did. We had a small family celebration. I know, Mom told me later. It was the same day I got back from that mission. I tried calling you guys, but no one answered. The silence that followed was painful. He looked down at his own hands, aged and marked by time. We were terrible parents to you, weren't we? I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to say yes, that they had failed to see me, to value my achievements. But another part understood that my parents were products of their time and their own experiences. You were the parents you knew how to be, I finally replied. Maybe you didn't understand my choices, but I never doubted that you loved me, in your own way. He nodded, visibly emotional. The rest of the flight passed in a more comfortable silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we landed in Chicago, it was already past 10 p.m. An official car was waiting to take us to my parents' house. I have to go back to D.C. tomorrow, I commented as the driver maneuvered through the familiar streets of the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The situation on the border requires my presence. I understand, my father replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added, Are you going to tell your mother and Richard? I considered the question. It wasn't in my plans, but after today, maybe it's time they knew who I really am. We arrived at my childhood home, a traditional 2-story house with a well-kept garden that was my mother's pride. The living room lights were on, which meant she was still awake, probably waiting for news from us. As we entered, we found not only my mother but also Richard and Lucy sitting in the living room. Apparently, they had come to check on their father's field trip to the Pentagon. Their faces showed surprise when they saw us arriving together, me still in my dress uniform. Finally, exclaimed my mother, getting up to hug us. I was worried. You weren't answering your phones. We were in a restricted area, Mom. Cell phones aren't allowed, I explained, kissing her cheek. Richard approached, a slightly mocking smile on his lips. So, Dad, how was learning about the little soldier's life? Did he show you how to march, Drew? My brother still maintained that condescending tone, oblivious to the transformation that had occurred. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward, his face serious. I need to say something, he began, his voice slightly trembling. About your brother. Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised by the solemn tone. My mother and Lucy also stopped, listening intently. "What's wrong, Dad? Did Drew get into some trouble?" Richard laughed, but his laughter died when he saw my father's expression. "No, son. I'm the one who got it wrong. We all did." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "For years, we've treated your brother as if he were less. As if his career was a joke, something unimportant compared to business, to money, to what we call real success." My mother frowned, confused. Richard seemed equally lost. "Dad, what are you talking about? Drew chose the military life. Nobody forced him." "Yes, he chose it. And do you know what he's become?" My father looked at me, then back at Richard. "Your brother isn't just a soldier. He's a brigadier general in the United States Army, one of the youngest in recent history." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard blinked several times, as if processing the information. My mother brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. "A general?" she murmured. "Drew, is that true?" I nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "Yes, Mom." "Today," my father continued, "I saw your brother in his element. I saw how he is respected, how he commands men and women who would give their lives for him without hesitation. I saw secretaries of state and even foreign officers treating him as an unquestionable authority." Richard remained silent, his face a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "At the wedding," my father went on, now looking directly at Richard, "we allowed your brother to be humiliated. We laughed when they called him the insignificant little soldier. And do you know what he was doing while you were planning the party? He was commanding operations that saved lives, making decisions that affected national security." "Dad, I didn't know," Richard started, but my father held up a hand, cutting him off. "None of us knew, because we never cared enough to ask. We were so convinced of our own importance, so focused on money and status, that we never stopped to really get to know Drew." My mother came to me, tears in her eyes. "Son, why did you never tell us?" "I tried, Mom, many times, but you never seemed interested." She hugged me, sobbing quietly. "Forgive me. Please forgive me." Richard remained motionless, clearly uncomfortable. His wife Lucy looked at me with new curiosity, as if seeing me for the first time. "And that black Lamborghini at the airport?" Richard finally asked. "Is it really yours?" I couldn't help a small smile. "Yes. A gift from the government of Kuwait after a rescue operation." The silence returned, thicker this time. I saw the exact moment reality settled in my brother's mind, the understanding that while he was boasting about his business successes, I was quietly building a career of national and international importance. "I didn't know," Richard finally said, the usual arrogance completely gone from his voice. "I really didn't know, Drew." "None of us knew," my mother repeated, still hugging me. "And that's unforgivable." "I didn't come here for forgiveness or recognition," I finally said. "My career gives me enough satisfaction. I just wanted you to understand that different paths can lead to different kinds of success." My father approached, and to my surprise, did something he had never done before. He brought his hand to his forehead in a gesture that mimicked a salute. It wasn't technically correct, but the intention was clear. "We're proud of you, son," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We should have said that a long time ago." Richard came closer too, visibly uncomfortable but making a genuine effort. "Sorry about the jokes, the things we said at the wedding. I had no idea." "It's okay," I replied, though a part of me knew it wasn't entirely okay. Years of indifference aren't erased in a day, but it was a start. That night, for the first time, I was the one who did the talking during dinner. I told stories I could share, explained the military structure, spoke of the peacekeeping missions we led in other countries. For the first time, my family listened, truly listened, with genuine attention and interest. When we finally retired, for the night, my mother walked me to my old room. At the door, she stopped and held my hands. You know what saddens me the most? She said, her eyes still red. All these years, people all over the country respected you, admired you, and we, your own family, didn't know the treasure we had. I kissed her forehead. The important thing is that you know now. The next morning, when I went out to get the car that would take me to the airport, I found the whole family at the door, my parents, Richard and Lucy. They were all there to see me off, something that had never happened before. My father approached me as I stood on the sidewalk. Son, I just wanted to say thank you for serving the country, for being who you are, even when we didn't recognize your worth. I nodded, unable to find the right words. He extended his hand for a formal shake, but then changed his mind and pulled me into a hug, the first real hug we had shared since I was a child. As I drove away in the official car, I looked in the rearview mirror. My family remained on the sidewalk watching the car pull away. My father had his hand raised in a makeshift salute, a simple gesture that carried the weight of years of misunderstandings finally corrected. And as the familiar streets of Chicago faded behind me, I realized a truth I had ignored in my hurt. Respect earned in silence often echoes the loudest. And finally, they had heard it.